Okay, yeah. Yeah, that is some of the 3D animation. It's identified as 3D uh, fractal animation. It's more 2D really because it just expands outward and contracts inwardly. It doesn't really give a visual of like isometrics presenting what is normally the real issue about 3D animation. Um, it doesn't present the depth um, that normally 3D isometrics really present. It is the HD colors. It is the splendor of color kaleidoscope fractal animation on the wall. As far as the graphics, it's about a 2.5 hour DVD that I have going through my projector that you're seeing behind me on what is actually inside of this tent in my own home. Yeah, where you see me normally with my drums, Prohibition VSX, with the Strata Red. I'm actually in the process of getting the Strata Blue right now. In any case, that is what you're seeing, like all as like a mural type of like live mural of like geometric designs and patterns, sequences, and certain factors backed out. But anyway, yes, what I really want to talk about right now, it seems to be kind of like some of the information, like I have a prepaid AT&T wireless, and they're acting like a previous experience of a program called Affordable Connectivity Program that actually is a governmental idea that it pays for like communications for people who are on like a SNAP food or a Lone Star card receiving benefits of EBT. And I think that EBT, electronic benefits transfer, is a little bit more than what's happening. I think it has a lot to do with San Antonio and the SA thing about like the Lexus LFSA, and remember the Alamo and Santa Ana and San Antonio, and other factors involving like COVID-19, being the 19th letter being S, and a lot of things. But it seemed to be the thing like right now. I have an AT&T prepaid wireless phone that is an AT&T Motivate, yet it's presenting an affordable connectivity. Yet they're presenting the issue like it's a toy, given features of like only when like recess and playtime is available as customer service. And it's like even acknowledging the way it really is that it's like they enforce it. I guess maybe that's a zodiac thing involving Leo. Maybe it's just because I was born in August and some idea of Leo, some idea of like a law enforcement organization, maybe. Just to mirror words out of my mouth, acknowledging like what's going on. In any case, yeah. So like the Affordable Connectivity Program is presented as a governmental program, but the thing is that it's presenting the real issue would seem to be the automated system, or like anyone actually taking responsibility, that it was in the beginning like involving air talk and air voice, two separate ones. It's like presenting it almost like, and now it seems to be like the thing about anatomy, like like would involve some idea of like OSHA, and sometimes terminology used in construction as an erection, and in anatomy it seemed to be like really the Keystone Pipeline, from the Alaskan Pipeline all the way from Alaska to Houston, and some idea of affirmative looping to like misappropriation allocation to the Mississippi, and something about anatomy and the weird science like will a penny fall faster than a feather in a vacuum tube, and something about anatomy between like the relationship where it really matters seems to be the idea of what relation is and is not. And I think something about Fairland sexes is reflecting some idea of like maybe what I've been experiencing beyond like urology or gastroenterology, as a matter of fact. Yeah, controlling my erection. Yeah, and Jesus said he knew you before the foundations of the earth. What are you really saying? That's really what it's getting to. It seems to be that the Affordable Connectivity Program is impersonating some idea, giving the impression that a governmental sponsored program is trying to give the impression, if not, a standard practice that presents maybe the idea of like Al-Anon presenting itself as a presidential executive legislative, giving the impression of family law, providing some idea of presence based upon a perception, and that in family law, like a foster granting and adoption as like some idea of like presence in family law, representative maybe what only Al-Anon would only suggest as liquid equity in maritime law, the ship channel. Okay. And here's what I really think about it is that something about supplemental security income has led to, obviously, years of like thinking about everything that's happened, and it seemed to be leading to the pro bono and some idea of the forecast that seemed to be the idea 4 inches of the humerus bone on both sides of my arm had. I was like, once again, like I'm on YouTube at WadeASVPriddy, and something like that happening. I'm a drummer, okay? And like drumming's 56, okay? And it seemed to be the thing about 56 and quite a bit of information about, like the 1980s bands 404 being the first number, the prefix of the White House being 4, 5, and 6, which is a total of 15. Or, the face value or the O looking like a 0. The thing with this is that, that presents like the forefathers of the nation in a way. And it seemed to be a thing about the alphanumerics of 6 being 52 and a vice president network, yet an acronym of VPN being 52. But it seemed to be the alphanumerics of 6, seemingly the thing about a double bass drummer with like a double bass and like 2 toms mounted on it. And anatomy, that might be called maybe not necessarily escrow, but maybe a scrotum as a drummer, maybe. Involving escrow, maybe, or maybe a pagan idolatry that represents maybe the idea of like Connect 4 Beyond, like Battleship, and someone saying, my Battleship versus the idea that someone's idea of like a lip sync is like impersonating maybe a misappropriation of the allocation of like someone's tampon's been lying to them. In any case, so like here's the thing that I really think about it in involving anatomy. That really, if it's the whole idea of like the Affordable Connectivity Program being like some idea of like Starlink or Arc Link Letter or some alignment in a parallel universe that would represent maybe some idea that would present the idea that relation between architecture and platform embedding encryption is only dependent upon a 90-degree angle, right angle of the equator, or like center line of oscillation presenting the perpendicular spire that represents some idea of the Eurodollar and the field scope and range of law based upon the center point energy's idea of like a 90-degree of 1 cycle per second oscillation. That 90-degree would look like a circle with a dot in it. Ultimately, even a pylon or the 7-point crown of the Statue of Liberty, or even the thought of like some idea of the District of Columbia representing some idea of like some sort of limit of high school as non-degreed and still neighborhoods of like monetary and domestic. Yet the acronym dimensional clause, seemingly the idea of access of a 90-degree of the cycle that would present the half above and half below, and the idea of fake news that Donald Trump is referring to as like the wooden buffalo nickel. It seems to be that over the letter N is involving Latin terminology, and the N being applied to certain factors like Al-Anon, foster granting, like a bunch of bird watching of a bunch of student loans combined with a Pell grant. Even Nigel Stanford seemed to be the thing about certain information. And it seemed to be that name that would represent the idea of the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program, and the difference between that N in Stanford being a Stafford guaranteed student loan, Texas guaranteed student loan combined with a Pell grant, and a bunch of bird watching of like a bunch of pelicans. And the whole thing about it seemed to be, the idea of some actual, stuff that's going on. And it seemed to be, the Nigel Stanford Automatica, the animation that presents like a little robot walking what looks like a 3D animated is actually a real place. And it seemed to be almost like a Nigel Stanford song, almost like Lakewood, and reference to in a statement said you're a container coming from like on television, like at Lakewood Church, okay. Although it seemed to be almost like like Speedcast, what was in like Caprock Telecommunications turning into Harris Corporation and Caprock Communications, and now Speedcast of Australia. It seemed to present that VSAT communication that has similarities of like Data Foundry, and the idea that in Marathon Oil. But it seemed to be the thing about all the information that's presenting the name Nigel Stanford as like a night vision shadow government Stargate program, and Abraham Lincoln. And it seemed to be the idea of like falsifying an adoption as like a family law, using the idea of like Al-Anon and liquidable equity as like maritime law, the ship channel. And one of the biggest shipments, I think it's to this day, probably the largest shipment of like the Chevrolet Geo Prism and the Hyundai Excel. And ultimately, to excel above the rest was like the phrase that seemed to be the thing about, an identical twin rainbow. And, like Saturn Sky, it was like a smaller version of the Corvette. And Trump actually referring to extreme betting. And it seemed to be a thing about the Alpha like, telepathic brainwaves in Chevrolet Silverado and Chevrolet Camaro IROC Z28 about the rectangle being the IROC at a 90 degree, identifying high-rise and huge commercial venues and buildings. And it seemed to be like even the thought of like even the 12 public grades of education involving, some idea like a PG-13 as like parental guidance involving even the PTA, giving the impression that a VIN number in the parking lot would only be the idea of a commercial venue of living quarter, but it's a building. It's really not that. But in practical application, it's almost like a prepaid tax of a 1040 EZ form. When it's refunded, it gives the similarities of non-taxable income of supplemental security income. And all this information that's been going on, it seemed to be the idea of like now kind of like it's presenting the thing that I've already been through, and I'm not using affordable connectivity program to pay for like really anything right now. I'm getting a direct deposit into the Bank of America of supplemental security income, Treasury 310. My name is Wade, okay? Actually, my name is like Alpha America 213, Wade, Sterling, Pretty. And, I'd mentioned previously that I'd been looking for like years of something that would be amphibious above the idea of the front lines of the Beatront or Vice President Network of International Banking Systems, of Vice President Networks of Immigration Customs Enforcement. And, but, the idea like, above it all, like somewhere like in aviation and the J. Edgar Hoover thing of like the hover and the hovercraft. And the same thing about J. Edgar Hoover and the hovercraft and amphibious in the way of what seemed to be the Alaskan pipeline all the way from Alaska to Houston. And that question in the movie Weird Science, will a penny fall faster than a feather in a vacuum tube? I mean, it's so anatomy. It's so beyond like not the humor thinking that being operated on gas and all this going on like during 1995 had been a result of, me going to the urology and endocrinologist about, the issue. And it seemed to be like, really, will a penny fall faster than a feather in a vacuum tube? Abraham Lincoln, the penny. And the feather, my name, Wade, being 33 and like bird. Or the idea of like maybe a student loan compelled with a Pell grant and a bunch of bird watching, a bunch of pelicans. It's really what we're talking about here. And a governmental sponsored program that seemed to be linking like the idea of like Harris County in Egypt, automatically the Persian Gulf in reference to, the idea of like a misappropriation allocation as some idea of like all the information on like I-10. It was like, years ago, which actually my name used to be on the east side of I-10 on the Bunker Hill area. And it seemed to be a thing about Barack Obama's reference in that way, knowing obviously that fact. My name now, I don't know where it's at, but it's like one to the other side on I-10 out in the San Jacinto Monument area, close to a reservoir. It could be even considered a pool. It's almost like collections of like an aggregate of defaulted student loans in a pool, but it's really not that. But it looks like something about that in terminology that like has the idea of a prepaid message, prepaid and sponsored by kind of, experience. So it seemed to be like really getting into the real issue of like, it seemed to be like the Stafford, Texas Guaranteed Student Loan. I mentioned that, and it seemed to be the liquid equity. Some people might refer to a 12-step program that would be, the AA thing. In that way, or the CA or NA thing. It's still an acronym and initial, likewise in any case. But normally when the 12-step program is involved with it, normally suggests that there's been an idea associated with the idea of like Al-Anon although it doesn't really identify that as like in-laws representing family law or presidential executive legislative, having the presence as family law. Yet liquid equity and maritime law seem to be the deal about, the plain horizons of the eccentric triangles of gross national product that way. Yet family law is still like the monetary and domestic of like neighborhoods of wooden neighborhoods. Yet presidents and executive and legislative is normally of the buildings and high-rise of gross national product, and GMC like raising the bars, the I-beam, beyond like neighborhoods of monetary domestic aggregates, and in that way. And it seemed to be the thing about the Roosevelt New Deal Act. The New Deal seemed to be like I'll have to actually think about the idea of like a monetary and domestic as the two, as like New Deal. And Act would be like the thing about, gross national product. It's like, beyond the classroom, the Act, it's like the Congressional Act being like the alphabet 151, and, the idea of like Holy Spirit and Secret Service and what that is in Washington, D.C., as compared to my thought about Kiefer Sutherland, really, is my thought about the NFC card with this last purchase I made on Amazon.com, presenting the issue that seemed to be like really the color code of like the 1980s band Foreigner, and the Foreigner 4 in the Midnight Blue song. But the 4 is the first number in the prefix of the White House. In 1995, the Air Force One of the President of the United States is identified as like a Midnight Blue. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that Vladimir Putin's presidential jet, or if it's really the issue of like prime minister, or some interchangeability, what would represent maybe Paul Volcker, the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank during the Ronald Reagan administration, described that Paul Volcker was called by Ronald Reagan to go to Washington, D.C. during his presidency, and placed him in two positions that actually represent the idea of like Robert E. Rubin, one of the current latest like United States Secretaries of Treasury. Yet Paul Volcker is presenting the issue like the difference between a president and a prime minister, and how that could be possibly so between a vice president network, involving like a prime minister would only be like the Delta Force, in verbatim in the way of only suggestive, persuasive technique of thinking. I mean, prime minister is not limited to the idea, although the color of the Soviet Union presidential jet is in midnight blue. Trump's personal jet has been identified as that, like, anyway. But I'm talking about the Air Force One of the White House in Washington, D.C., the President of the United States, the one year that I know of. And I think it's the only year that the FBI used the acronym showing that protected by the FBI involving We International. And I'm assuming not limited to, but maybe specifically in the Houston area. Maybe that's all it needs to mean. But really doesn't have to be limited to it. But the thing about FBI protecting regions of motion picture and entertainment and music video and compact that seem to be, the real deal about the summit meetings of Geneva, Switzerland, and the summit here in Houston, turning into the summit and then into the compact center of the Houston Rockets. And VSAT Communications, obviously, that's involved with like rockets, okay? And now Lakewood Church, not far from the Israeli embassy, several blocks away in Greenway Plaza, in the Wesleyan area, in inner loop of like Highway 59, not far from where Univision used to be, on Highway 59, like right at West Loop 610, probably within a mile and a half, 2 miles from each other. But in any case, yeah, so like it seemed to be like right now, I'm kind of like thinking about that, because it seemed to be the Automatica. I was kind of like automatically listening to it. I mean, I'm a drummer, okay, and that particular one has the sound, but it seemed to be a little bit more involved that reflects some idea of, what the idea of going through the idea of like, we're saying software, whether it's a securities annuities network or like a storage area network, or some idea like going through the Stargate program, or what prime ministers mean as far as like live on air, auditing legal media. Not that deposition would only be the idea of like training an unknown soldier as a landmark, okay, or in need of like restoration as a historic landmark, okay, or some added preservatives and byproducts that would only represent some idea of restoration and maintaining some idea of maintaining some value of like the still shot. In any case, so like there's some other information. It seemed to be that Nigel Stanford. I mean, it's like it's not limited to, but it's particular to Automatica and the cymatic science versus music. Those are the two that I really listen to right now. Anyway, and I know something that similar to seem to be of a 10-star general, linking some idea like some place in Pearland all the way to Germany and Paris of like an identical twin female that seemed to have the neo thing about them. Yeah, about something about that involving obviously the thing about SWAT. And something in my mind seemed to be involving some idea of like January 1st involving what was identified as like the capital of the riots on January 1st. And somehow a pair of speakers that got in my home that really weren't mine. And since they got in my home and they weren't mine and I didn't put them there, so like, where they're at now, it's like I already took them to the pawn shop, okay? Does anyone have a problem with that? Like already, okay? Because I'm not the one who brought them into my home, so like what are you doing in my home to begin with, okay? Is really what I'm saying. So like in any case, okay? So I mean all that like New York Stock Exchange and all that idea of like foster care and adoption is some idea of babysitting in Babylon and Pearland, okay? Or looking for an umbilical cord that might only be the idea of relation. Okay, and the similarities to all this information is seen to be ultimately being, some idea of what only Axis presents as like, this kind of stuff going on for a considerable amount of time. Or some idea of like, there's a need for like, Al-Anon to be involved, representing some idea of impersonating in-law as maybe not family law, but maybe a presidential executive representing the commercial venue of living quarter in the high-rise that's not a neighborhood. And liquid equity and maritime law, the ship channel will only present maybe liquid equity as maritime law, or the thought of really not liquidation and in the means of like expendable, but have a Stargate program. So like in any case, so like like 35 years has passed, okay, since a baptism. Really my birth year, okay, 1964. But I mean, I noticed some serious changes taking place after that one particular baptism at the Mormon Church. Obviously, the American issue, not a question of Region 1 or binary numbers of Region 0 or a Vice President network, but it seemed that a Vice President network having some idea of like this neighborhood as like County Road 100, 107A, the numeric value only 107, and like 107A, B, C, D, E, F, G had alternated. Okay, and the alphanumerics of 56, seemingly the thing about the first number in the prefix of the White House with the remainder of 56 is like the silence of the word light that allowed some kind of idea of like alternating circuit, like the International Electronic Engineering presenting the electrical cycle, giving the impression of an alternating electrical circuit and giving the appearance the same but not same meaning or value of like 1 cycle per second. They look the same but don't have the same meaning or value like at all, okay? And that one word light in this neighborhood seemed to be about the county road 107, the numeric value only, that allowed the alternating between the G and H, and it being the thing about a drum, okay? Or paper might be in 56 is 10, being alphanumeric from 94, a Roe v. Wade thing, okay? In my mind, involving the annotated adoption and abortion, and Roe being spelled with R-O-E. And the thing now seemed to be like, the midnight blue about the color code of 1995 and the alphanumerics of Skyline. Almost like, light scribe as like an invisible laser. The idea that a skyline not limited to like a jet, but I mean even a laser band that's normally sometimes not visible unless like the fog is involved. But based upon what has been really the idea, there's all kinds of different types of, lasers. And I called 911 like yesterday, and I was talking to the 911 operator. I was like asking her, hey, what's all that about, all that on I-10 on the west side of West Loop 610. My name used to be out in that area. My name is Wade. Okay, it's out in the Bunker Hill area on the west side of Houston, off of I-10. And it seemed to be that being that, it's almost like the Affordable Connectivity Program trying to override and giving the impression of family law as foster granting and adoption, giving the impression of presence as foster granting, but liquid equity of maritime law as Al-Anon had a presidential, executive, and legislative, giving the impression of presence would only suggest maybe family law. Like an in-law normally in a lot of families normally it's the thought and idea that normally that they're normally not involved with the family that's considering them an in-law to someone else in the family. But what really seems to be the real issue is maritime law is liquidal equity based upon pronunciation and linguistic and alphanumerics. And the Affordable Connectivity Program presents the issue that seemed to be, I don't want to really just, be the idea of like LaToya Jackson or, Jackson being like a 5-star shoulder or a 10-star general and the pi r squared thing about, the $5 being the Jackson thing, or the idea of like a replicated toy presenting, the features as, as an adult, but this is Pearland and Babylon, okay? And it seemed to be like whether or not if searching for an umbilical cord for the motherlode is some ideal relation. There seemed to be the Alaskan pipeline having fair use of a movie called Weird Science, and the question, will a penny fall faster than a feather in a vacuum tube? The J. Edgar Hoover amphibious thing, controlling an erection in anatomy. Okay, it's like a double bass drummer, and like a scrotum. It's like, you got your things between the legs, like, and it's kind of like, the carbon footprint, like a double bass drummer, as absentee voting. You got to be kidding me? Controlling an erection over a phrase of like, will a penny, Abraham Lincoln, night vision, shutter government Stargate program, fall faster than a feather like a bird? My name, Wade, 33, bird name. Are you controlling my erection? Or is it the idea of fitting, like one size fits all? Or if it's like, really? What is that, like a prototype being customized as configuration? Or is that the end user, like a database administration as a computer operator? Is that like a rating of like a CO of like a Dove Gray uniform? Presenting EA Sports in that manner? EA Sports is a Dove Gray as a CO? Or is it really EA? COEA? Or is it really Aetna? Is it Aetna, or is it the state statutes annotated involving insurance and jurisprudence that reflects the only idea what own power only means to an eccentric triangle, using a dolphin to identify some idea of a screensaver of two eccentric triangles representing the structure of federal, state, local authorities, and the amenities of Fred Flintstone and Bedrock. So Nigel, Stanford is actually the automatic thing about a location that's actually a real place I was taken to. And like I mentioned previously, like yesterday, I talked to 911, talking to the 911 operator. Hey, what's all that about the robotic laser surgery on I-10 on the way? And then, what is the deal about the deal in Katy? Is it the misappropriation of allocation representing Katy, Texas, the allocata? Or is it really the military base presenting the remote drone piloting issue? And that is the location, drone being the alphanumerics of 56. So what does that mean to the prefix of the White House? That a remote drone pilot is involved with like remote laser surgery? Robotic laser surgery? Like a laser beam. Is that the ergonomic factor that, being inside of a bank with like security cameras is presenting what presents like the red laser in the movie Best Defense, involving like satellite technology? That's the red laser. It's like the mere words out of my mouth as the New Testament. Identifying a color code of the United States codes annotated in the red book, the mere words out of my mouth. It's like auditing like legal media. Not necessarily a question of editing or post-production. Really? Or is it the EA Sports and who knows anyway form of instant replays in a blink of an eye? Or is it the CO factor of like, the rate of intivity thing about, the thing about television programming? Television programming in the Carter administration identifying a military crisis. A failed attempt to rescue some military in a military base of what would seem to be the the thought of a hostage crisis inside a military base. Actually, that happens in like circuits of like prison units, okay, of Stargate programs is really what I'm talking about. And the memory minus the fact involving like a serious 1 year period. So now all this information about a governmental sponsored program based upon the idea that Health and Human Services, or the idea of like SNAP food benefits and Lone Star card, is presenting some idea of like appreciation and depreciation, or a combine of like only monetary and domestic of neighborhoods for even having the idea of an electronic benefits transfer. I think there's more to the EBT of a TB test. And what is that? The same initials? EBT, a bet? BET, that's like a black thing, isn't it? Like Jet Magazine, isn't it? In Motown, huh? The BET thing, huh? The electronic benefits transfer. EBT is what? Like Bette Midler of A Military Bill of Determinant and like God is Watching from a Distance of a Dream Theater music video involving that sacrifice sons of that jet that's like presented with George Bush in it, or the producer of like Randall Garcia. Yet the same identical, showing it's like the Soviet presidential jet of the Midnight Blue with gold on it, but that's not a cargo jet, but looks identical in design and a different color that the Armored Green is showing in the music video with George Bush and produced by Randall Garcia, but it's a cargo jet, and the difference between a cargo jet is what? A cargo jet. So what does that mean? Clutch cargo. So what does that mean? Primate spawning of primate spawning. A prime minister was out of masturbator in Salt Flats and thinking of U-Card. Wow, really good seeing you. Yeah, that's like Salt Lake City in like Utah, huh? Really good seeing you. Thinking of you, yeah. So like anyway, okay. So that's not exactly the Deep Star 6, but how that Spore Stone getting the coral reefs, I mean, in any case, so it seemed to be the thing about that NFC card being alphanumeric 23, and like this GMC being 23, racing a bar, being an I-beam, beyond a neighborhood, is really the military grade that I'm talking about, like right now, and involving a commercial venue being recorded that's not affected by television programming of K or W. But the W seems to present that issue. Is it really Volkswagen? Is it really a double B? It presents the W of K television as W, but it's two V's, like VSAT Communications, and almost a similar similarities of bandwidth and spectrum of a 13-band graphic equalizer involving VSAT Communications in outer space. And it seemed to be the alphanumerics of the State of the Union address, likewise in addition to one word in Book of Thessalonians about Lord Jesus Christ resurrecting and going to Mount Olives, that's a plateau, and from Mount Olives ascending into the sky and re-entering heaven. And it seemed to be the thing about the 12-foot reserve banks, and it seemed to be the thing about Sacramento, one of the major cities of 12 major cities of the 12-foot reserve banks in Sacramento, seemed to be the one after a 1992 baptism, seemed to be the Six Flags baptism, and then the 12-foot reserve. All I ever knew about the grand opening of the 12-foot reserve banks was 1914 until after 1992. And finding out that there was like actually a grand opening in 1913. The information was like provided like an American citizen and like a vice president network as Region 1 and Region 0. I mean my whole entire life, okay? I only discovered over baptism at the Mormon Church, the American religion. I didn't think that would be even an issue of a carbon footprint or absentee voting or some idea of a statute, and absentee voting of a statute being a statute in a color code of constitutional law and state statutes annotated of a bird in the 10 Commandments, or, some idea of the Jackson 5, or, a 10-star general representing a color code. Similarly of neighborhoods, even 10-star generals seem to be a thing of neighborhoods, and how true that is. I mean, if they're still involved with K television, K radio, I mean, does it really mean that they're really not the grade, but have the credentials of a 10-star general? Or is it really based upon a principle of a color code an administration of color code involving the black thing of space exploration, as if that would be, maybe like, it's plain or braille, it's clear to see. There's some academic level of like, not the availability of like even Abraham Lincoln studying in the dark. Some idea in my mind, a lack of education and something black in a way that would present maybe, the idea that a lack of knowledge and wisdom and education and academics would be the idea of suppression and loss prevention beyond comprehension. Maybe not limited to, obviously, this planet of space exploration, representing like does it seem like you're not on this planet about that kind of stuff? Or is it like, everything you've ever known is not the way it is, going through the circuit? In any case, okay. Or some idea that presents the real fact about what administration is at any and every level. So, I mean, is it really the idea of a 10-star general? I mean, is it an option of color of uniform? I mean, is it brown only representative of like Brazoria? Or is it really the color of money? Kobe ID 19 is 72. And Make America Great as a 10-star general? Or is it really the idea, ultimately getting to space exploration? Or maybe it's the HPD thing about the Hawaiian hula hoop beyond the toilet. Or maybe even the oblong egg in the Easter basket. The thing with this is that really it seemed to be really, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the idea that the Affordable Connectivity Program is like, have you driven a Ford lately? Only seems to be the thing about, a Bryan Adams video, do I have to say the words? And, even the Whitney Houston song, it's kind of like I hear her sing that song with Kevin Costner, the movie Bodyguard, and I Will Always Love You, that one particular song. It seemed to be, I mean, really an experience that seemed to be, I mean, really beyond like not funny to me, really. About an ensemble of a drummer in Turkey. And the thing about, and that if she stays, that she will only stand in your way, seemed to be like the thing of an experience of a drummer, like knowing that a symbol is really that. And in pronunciation, it sounds like symbol is like in between the C and the PTIS. It's almost like the Sansapo being an acronym that's joined together and looks like one. But you know that it's a syllable and an acronym of Securities and Annuities Network and Storage Area Network. And that's kind of like the deal about a venture and merger of corporate law, presenting the idea normally of not involving like neighborhoods, but beyond the idea of neighborhoods of like corporate, not really business law of a pie chart. A pie chart is automatically the thought of pronunciation and pi r squared using the radius to find the diameter. In any case, so it seemed to be, really some of that information that's presenting some idea of like foster granting and adoption as family law, having some idea of maritime law as liquid equity. I've said it before, I don't mean to sound like an economic plea bargain. Ponzi scheming, raffling voucher, auctioneering, clearance, and warehousing. It almost seems to be, really, really like foster granting the idea of an adoption, presenting it as like a governmental structure. It's like the Affordable Connectivity Program of Ford Aerospace and Starlink. Is it really? Or is it really the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country? I mean, is the Ford Aerospace, have you driven Ford lately about the Starlink being, I mean, is it really the Art Link letter thing? Hey, is that Art Link letter for Peter to Pearly Gates of Heaven? And he brought us on a roll of toilet paper with all the names written in Book of Life. The real evangelist. I mean, for real. Using the stars for perfect 10-10 vision. Starlink, I mean, like, is that Art Link letter to Pearly Gates of Heaven? Or, like, you sitting on a toilet with a Cisco kid and then find public and private legal tender as like legal media, and then find the note being legal tender for all depot public and private as Cisco kid's got his own roll of toilet paper involving public and private, and it just happens to be a color code of the toilet. Is that like Art Link letter with Peter to Pearly Gates of Heaven? Or like, are you sitting on the toilet like a 90-degree? Is it like a circle, the Hawaiian hula hoop? Or is it like oblong, like the Easter egg basket? And like, what are you looking for? Having a right to assemble like the Bandcamp Beanie Weenie Patrol? Or is it really the question, the Weird Science movie, and anatomy involving like relation? One size fits all, are you sure? Are you controlling my erection is really what's getting to. Going through like endocrinology, or is it really just the idea of like, what? Jesus said he knew you before the foundations of the earth? So like, what's that supposed to mean? That the Alaskan pipeline was like before the foundations of the earth of like the movie Weird Science? Will a penny, Abraham Lincoln, fall faster than a feather, a bird? Or is it the absentee voting of a statue being the blackbird? And the Ten Commandments involving what? The blackbird of the crow? Or is it the escrow? Is it a black color code of like the scrotum based upon a black dot on the map? Or is that a family name that's just got a color code of caviar and primate spawning? Hadn't even made it to, sea level yet? Or is that like the freshwater thing beyond like saltwater issue? Bass Pro on Highway 288. And the forecast of graphite. Similarly, the thing about even, lubrication that's identified in Mobile 1, yet a metallic particle that actually is a magnetic thing that would almost be like an MRI magnetic resonance. It's like involving different types of contrast and isotope. And what isotope is and is not to an MRI as compared to an infusion or transfusion or magnetic resonance, presenting the idea as a graphite, something of lubricant of like a fishing reel. That's even terminology used in gastroenterology. That it going through like Mobile 1, it's like automatically Mobile 1. So what does that mean? That it's Air Force One? Or Ulysis S. Grant presenting presidential debate in the form of what? Monetary and domestic being on one side, and what gross national product of like all the freedoms of annuity and electronic power, protected like things that would involve like tariffs as a prepaid tax, protecting non-taxable income of gross national product of a commercial venue of living quarter, and some of the biggest shipments in Houston being like Chevrolet GeoPrism and Hyundai Excel. Similarly, the thing about GeoPrism is GeoPrison, and the alphanumeric 109 is 110. Ultimately, 247, identifying like the alphanumeric 109 of a governor as president, or Los Angeles as president. 109 is 110, or the idea of YouTube, or written being the word, or the writs of habeas corpus, identifying maybe the idea of like human capital lifespan of like intellectual easements of intellectual property as de facto, litigation de facto, and writs of habeas corpus between Wyatt Earp and John Wayne and True Grit. And Earp in the exclusionary rule provision of like executive powers, sovereign immunities, and governmental amnesties. And alphanumeric 39, the same as IEEO and like OPEC. Similarly, think about the symbolic representation joined together, presenting the spirit of adoption as the alphanumeric 206 in proper English numerical composition. Once again, Brazoria Country with the R in Brazoria County being that like a biblical scripture, identifying some symbolic representation between the C and the PTIs on the backside of the US dollar, yet geographical miracle in my mind of Z71 and Chevrolet Silverado Z71 and telepathic brainwaves of Galveston County in the Los Angeles area code, identifying Los Angeles as a 213, but it's a 109 and 213 issue, and ultimately even getting to the last area code of like 323. And it seemed to be the thing about that 5 eccentric triangles, not that it seemed to be anything of a pi r squared of a 10-star general, but it is 5 eccentric triangles that overlap that presents, reading it analytically and symbolically, being the 323, like reading Lockheed Martin's, that in my mind's automatically, the intersecting axes in the lines being read as a 232 thing, like, and the exact opposite, well, not really the exact opposite, but it is 232 becoming 323, which looks exactly like the opposite, but still Los Angeles and Lockheed Martin with the two Air Force lines and 3 intersecting axes, and what an atonement is, and all that information. But anyway, it's already going on like 44 minutes and 44 seconds. But I feel like really want to start out about that, because it seemed to be that foster grade and adoption is like almost like a governmental program that I'm not involved in, but it seems to be that it's being used. You have an impression that, like even supplemental security is the question: does it really? Is it like some idea of like probate as false granting and adoption of benefits as an electronic benefits transfer, or is it like the big load, seemingly something of San Antonio? Remember the Alamo, and obviously the Geneva, Switzerland. In my mind, automatically the Lexus LFSA and Mercedes presenting the smart car, and even CenterPoint Energy being the smart meter, seemingly including the euro dollar, and the new copters minus that one word, the Alpharex 192, being like 12, region 1 and 2, yet 12 of the 12 Federal Reserve Banks and 12 times to Israel. And, ultimately, the thing about even the reality of like a to ocean or not to ocean between like Oceans 12, and it seemed to be identifying the two delta forces of the Persian Gulf and Latin America. Would seem to be the thing about Pulse Club in Orlando, like once again. And it seemed to be like foster care and adoption. It's like really all that seemed to be involved with like the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's the question, have you driven forward lately? And it seemed to be, some information about, I'm hearing the word stand as like Istanbul now. I'm a drummer, okay? It's not that I think of me being a double bass drummer as a scrotum and like 4 toms in front of me, or, like the pi r squared is like now the exponential power of multiplication, and now there's like a little bit more involved, I'm not considering my bass drums my scrotum, okay? But it sounds that way with like toms on top of it, okay? Or some idea of like, a carbon footprint as a double bass drummer representing the summit meetings of like bands from all around the entire world as a carbon footprint of the summit here in Houston and Geneva, Switzerland. I mean, that was never even any kind of way, anything in my mind of potentially maybe going to a King James Version Bible, or some accusation that hadn't been on like YouTube as like legal media, or the American Express card with 4-digit like MP4 format of audio, video, like YouTube presents like right now live as I'm recording it and fixing to upload it to YouTube on my phone. Supposedly an AT&T prepaid wireless that I've been getting calls, and it's starting to act like a phone system, the Affordable Connectivity Program that I had like 5 or 6 years ago, and I decided to like get rid of it because it's presenting what sounds to me like the LaToya Jackson. It's like a toy. It looks like it has everything about it, but doesn't like work like at all. And now it's starting to act that way again on this phone. It's supposed to be AT&T, not the Affordable Connectivity Program, or some AirTalk or AirVoice presenting some idea of like, artificial intelligence, or some ergonomic factor, some like wishful thinking. I don't know if you call that the contrafair, or contraception, but hey, how about that screensaver? I mean, skip all the crap, okay? I mean, for real, okay? So what is that supposed to mean? That the American Idol is presenting what RPM in Iowa County on Highway 288 as like the 800 RPM of transportation, of only moving motor vehicles with like 4 wheels. Yet it presents the 3 RPMs of the black vinyl, 33, 45, and 78. Okay, so like, what is that supposed to mean? That it's color coded being black that way? Of a 1-800 number as toll free? Really, who you telling at a 1-800 number? I mean, does it mean it's black, being 1800 and ahead of schedule as a 1-800 number? Or the 800 RPMs is a standard? Reflecting what? Whether or not if a VIN number is actually attached to anything other than a neighborhood? Or is that the misappropriation allocation, the Mississippi, presenting anything other but including a vice president network as a VIN number in everyone's driveway? It's because you're in a neighborhood, not a commercial venue. You hadn't even made the grade yet, even if you're degreed and on a golf course. And I'm sure you come down exactly to be exactly, not the grade. It's not that you have to be. It's not that you don't live in a high rise or a commercial venue. Whether you're on a golf course or not, whether you want anyone to know or not, you're still in a wooden home on a golf course, okay? Whether you're about an 18-hole golf course, it still presents, all that log cabin stuff of a lodge and the country club issue. I mean, it's still, it still looks, it's really, nice landscaping, but I don't think I'm going through the Garden of Eden again, okay? Or some idea of like some fallen leaf representative of like Eve, Adam and Eve, okay? Just because it's like something about the golf course, okay? The Garden of Eden, what are you saying that's like on par? It's a golf course? Or are you really reflecting some idea? The Garden of Eden? Wow. Huh. That almost sounds like a Billy Thorpe, Children of the Sun, East of Eden song, huh? Billy Thorpe, wow, Children of the Sun. Yeah. Yeah, wow, man. East of Eden, yeah, sure. Sure it is, yeah. Wow. That's like Major Healy, huh? I Dream of Jeannie, really? Do I really? Major Healy, huh? Major Nelson, yeah. Yeah. There seemed to be a thing about it in it. Major Nelson, huh? Yeah, so like anyway, the thing with this is that it presents that live on air thing about I Dream of Jeannie. Well, it really does, doesn't it? With Major Nelson, huh? And Major Healy, huh? Live on air. Air rates, I mean, it's like automatically I Dream of Jeannie is some idea of like a consensual participation is what? Relation? Are you kidding me? I mean, for real, like who's kidding about anything about television programming? Wow, how about that screensaver? Don't tell me it's the hee-haw effect of a field officer of the FBI protecting Region Zeros, maybe, anywhere else other than like the North American continent, and like, acting like they're like all amphibious in need of moon boots, or some choreographed, thermocoupled, participating factors of some like conductive behavior as a conduct report. I mean, this is like Pearland, Texas, okay? It's still like Region 1, and I don't know if that's like placing boundaries and limitations, or like a need of an economic factor, geographically, some idea of like maybe identifying the U.S. dollar as maybe some, degree level of like agreeing to like being in the bank and maybe not realize that there's an accusation of even being in the bank, and not even, actually identifying maybe that it's you yourself in the bank with a U.S. dollar as an option of an acronym. And that's always the issue involving a circuit in television programming, is what it's already proven to be as far as my experience. Anyway, okay. So like in any case, okay. So now it's presenting the issue of like, Nigel Stanford. I mean, I listen to it, okay, but I'm hearing exactly what, that particular guy wants me to hear. Okay. And it seemed to be of a general, yet something of Paris, yet something of Europe. Germany and Paris seem to be the two. One of the what is it? The SWAT thing. Yeah. Of a Stargate program. Yeah, it seemed to be a location in some of the videos in there is actually identifying, something about, lucky to even remember it, even if I'm looking at it. It's like the deal about some of those videos on YouTube now, after a 25 to 30 year period, depending upon what point of origin, seem to be involving 10-star general, different locations between Germany and Paris, involving some music video of like the SWAT. And I'm trying to place whether if it's a combine of Paris and like Germany, but it's the identical identity. What appears to be, genetics of like what would appear to be like identical twins between Paris and like Germany, of those locations, and some idea of the general's daughter. But in any case, yeah, so like in any case, so like, this thing about that, I'm thinking about the Affordable Connectivity Program and have you driven it forward lately? That's the thing that does that include like General Motors Acceptance Corporation? Or is it really the idea of Istanbul in Turkey representing the immunoglobulin as a turkey, the gobble of the immunoglobulin, and ultimately amyloidosis and amount of white blood cells being produced, and it's called like amyloidosis. And normally that's identified as maybe more so of exposure. It's presented a lot of times only related to oncology, given the perception that the only thing about it is like involving cancer. It's really the exposure to the treatment that causes a reaction in the bone marrow and affects the immunoglobulin. Because of the treatment combating cancer itself, is affecting not really the cancer itself, but what is normally a demanded requirement involving chemotherapy and like radiation and all that contrast and magnetic resonance and the exposure of even, I'm assuming maybe even gamma rays that might be presented in like X-rays, not limited to, and all that exposure over a time. Normally, my mother lasted like 2 years with like stage 4 cancer. My father lasted 3 years, and I'm not sure if it was any stage identified. I was so like tired staying up with my father. I mean, day and night. I mean, for like 3 years nonstop. I mean, I like beyond tired, losing that much sleep. Like I kind of like am now, having quite a bit on my mind, and still trying to like get my drums in all this. I had like pretty close to like a real setup for like an entire recording studio. Not everything, and then all started taking place. It's kind of like, am I experiencing someone that's not a musician, or maybe really is a musician? And the intellectual duration of lifespan involving intellectual property will only be what the human capital factor of lifespan is de facto between litigation and res habeas corpus, or is that loss prevention and suppression as like monetary and domestic only of neighborhoods? Or is it like really the idea of like presidential, executive, and legislative presenting themselves as Al-Anon as maritime law, identifying liquidable equity and like family law, foster granted and adoption as relation, an architecture platform, embedding encryption, depending upon a 9 degree of a frequency above the letter N in Latin terminology, identifying delta forces with an electronic schematic symbol of the triangle, and likewise the delta force of the biggest mouth of the river, similarly the thing, the Orlando, between the Persian Gulf and Latin America, in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, in practical application, identifying the history of the US dollar below the equator, and that word mammon, and practical application, identifying something about what the Persian Gulf, in that way, of what Al-Qaeda, or is it really Katy, Texas? Is it really Al-Qaeda, misappropriation of Katy, Texas? Or is it really the idea that all that information on I-10 as like, robotic, remote robotic laser surgery on I-10, more so closer to the Bunker Hill area, yet all the way, going towards Katy, Texas, the Army military base involving remote drone piloting. I mean, is that the idea of like what's going on? Because I bought a compact disc and been to the summit? Or is it like I'm going to the circuit doing a whole bunch of alphanumerics and not realizing like, why is all that happening like while I'm asleep? And then, some idea in my mind after years later, being like 20, 25, 30 years now, seemingly be the thing about memory minus facto being 35 in human capital of like the star of like state capitals worldwide, not limited to the US dollar, the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, of multi-international banking systems and multinational jurisdictions involving that jurisprudence and golf courses, and what that one word repudiation between warehousing and real estate really seemed to be, seemingly even the jurisprudence and some idea of like a comptrollers having regulatory commission governing some idea of insurance as like giving the impression of FDIC claims as loss prevention, or some idea like, well, it's not a breach of copyright, or it's not a breach of like trademark, it's not a copyrighted patent as intellectual property, having fair use, generating like royalties as like annuity, or non-taxable income as getting a refund, giving the impression of non-taxable income of supplemental security income, being some idea of a registered charity based upon an endorsement of like someone that don't even know what the hell they're endorsing their entire employment history about. Or is it like the idea of like, who knows anyway, of a product registration, giving the impression of the recent statute in the IRA and the Apple iPhone SE, and between the only issue about the SE being in pronunciation being yes in Spanish, and pronunciation in English is like, yes being 49, and deal about a Pro. It seemed to be the pronunciation Apple iPhone SE being 24, like the acronym HOA, GMAC, and IEEE, and SE in pronunciation being the yes, yet the alphanumerics of yes being 49 and a Pro seem to be leading to the pro bono of non-taxable income involving supplemental security income of the Apple iPhone between the recent statute being the ERISA and the IRA, and the remainder on the ERISA side being the SE, and the Apple iPhone SE seem to be, it. And between the ERISA statute that way and the acronym of yes and with the SE, but in reality, with the E, it defines the same thing about the difference between calculus and quantum in pronunciation, because C in pronunciation in Spanish is yes, but C in English is like vision. The alphanumerics are 88. Even New Deal Act of the Roosevelt New Deal Act in California. And, the thing about, vision being 88 with the S is like visions in plural. The alphanumerics 107 being the idea of like Diners Club and military and quantum and like the kind of road I'm on like right now. And this entire neighborhood, really. I think there's like seven streets, maybe 8. But I know that one is like 107. This road was originally, when I first moved here, was 107C. Then like where'd the C go? It's like 107. But I knew that much about it, and I knew that I'd seen the G and H, and it seemed to be, the principle of the International Electronic Engineering between electrical and electronic, between an alternating circuit of electricity as compared to a frequency of software on the electronic side, looking the same, doesn't mean the same or have the same value. And that's like something about the word light. And like she's like with corrective eye surgery and light being 56, yet 404 color code of 404, the 80s band Foreigner and the 404 thing about the forefathers of the nation. There's some idea of like the acronym the FBI presenting in 1995 as the 404, but yet the prefix of the White House, the first number of the prefix of the White House being 4, with the remainder of 5 and 6 being 56, like a drum, okay? And plaza, and even the word light, okay, is the real issue that I'm talking about. And like maybe the thought of a bicentennial drummer that eventually that I would like have all this, that really I'm almost assuming that's a persuasive thing that like I love doing anyways, like, practicing like everything I like listening to. Me getting to my original music has obviously been some idea of something that's been like really going on as maybe a prolonged issue, like whether knowing or not knowing what lifespan involving de facto has obviously been between litigation, de facto, and writs of habeas corpus, or what legal media is or is not, and what the deal is about Dr. Pepper deed restrictions. And I think really the only deed restriction is that you're in a neighborhood, whether you're in a commercial venue or a commercial venue anywhere, and you still have K television or W television, you're still the category of not making a grade. It's still a building, not just because you have it's not a venue just because you have a vehicle with a VIN number. It's a proven fact that going through the 12 public grades of education, a PG-13 rating, it's like presidential governors of parental guidance presenting the idea that all that's like is a PTA. And, some idea of all that being the idea of the PTA being, proper English numerical composition with the P visible and P not pronounced being an invisible, and the TA being 21 and like you. And and YOU, and now I'm 61 years of age, and it's like equating to like Roca now has a W in it, and equate to, the same pronunciation and the value of 61. It's the year 2025 based upon my birth year of August 1964. And seemingly the thing about HTTP:// American in Israel in a movie, but the thing with this is that legal media is not exactly the idea of, a disaster. There's a difference between movie and television, although you might think that having fair use of television might only be the idea of only what programming means is a deed restriction. And like so far, realizing that the thought of like auditing legal media is like deed restrictions just for turning television on. And just because it's in a neighborhood, it's almost like not allowed. In my mind, automatically, a commercial venue of living quarters is not affected by television programming, meaning they have their own entire whole different way of life that isn't affected by deed restrictions because it's not allowed. It's not there. It's not a debate. It's not a presidential debate of Ulysis as Grant or tipping the scales as 5-star general as Agent 00 and a 5-star general, and 5 and double O is 00. And the 50, thing about America, the 50-50, tipping the scales of justice thing. So like I'm about that commercial venue of living quarter, getting beyond what's not considered a neighborhood, right here at 3611 Money Street, Pearland, Texas. And yeah, sure, in a Hill HX50, yes, helicopter, blowing, It's like, where's my Diners Club card for real? Yeah, Yeah, a whole new way of life, yeah. That's not considered a neighborhood or affected by television programming. So, like, what does that mean? So, like, how that's going to happen? Like I'm uploading this to, like, YouTube, like, right now, right? Live on air and, like, pre-recorded this live, yeah. So, like, good, yeah. So, like, this is what I'm really referring to is, like, a whole different thing about, since, like, all that had happened and realizing that 4 inches of my humerus bone had been removed has also given the thought of, like, 1992 being the U2 thing, and ultimately, automatically in my mind, I'm a drummer and musician and singer. I listen to that music like of the 80s, like, all the time. It's not like I'm trying to still listen to it. I'm looking for, the thing that goes a little bit beyond the idea of, like, not the idea of, like, loss prevention or, suppression as, like, depreciation or, some idea of settlements, but more so on the, the progression of the future that is, like, the idea of, like, annuity, and depreciation just isn't the word, but annuity and electronics in a way of progression of appreciation and all that factor about, what relation is. That's not really, the idea of, combating, on a daily standard is anything other than, like, having a normal smooth day or some idea of a position that only reflects maybe antisocial behavior or some idea of legal media, like trying to, promote some idea like Roe v. Wade. And my name is Wade, okay, but the alphanumerics of Aryan Scans of Aden seem to be, the J. Edgar Hoover amphibious thing to do beyond my name Wade being some idea of, like, wade fishing on the front lines of the beachfront, or even the thought of liquid equity even in freshwater. And it almost presents, what our RPM is in that way in Iowa Colony, the alphanumerics 132 in presidential or Univision. Even the thing about, the Western Auto using binary numbers like I-10 would be like 0 and 1 and 1 and 0 applied to alphanumerics 131, which is actually the alphanumerics of Roosevelt, Western Auto. Roosevelt New Deal Act and Western Auto seem to have the thing when the alphanumeric value of, like, binary numbers 1 and 0 is reversed. 131 becomes 132, and then reverse being 10, it's like 141. And I did it with that one particular thing because of, like, monetary and domestic representing the idea of, like, neighborhoods as a categorization, and gross national product being, like, the idea of high-rise towers of power, and, like, annuity of, like, some idea of Zion of 1,000 years of peace, not affected by, like, any of it. Not a question of television programming being a deed restriction just because the television has been turned on of K television is really the real issue. Of deed restrictions, just turn K television, even W television. Is it really W television or is it really double V? For real, okay? The only thing about a double V represents, in my mind, the 2 KU bands identified in VSAT communications. That was, like, automatically my interest in direction of communications involving network operation centers. And, like, TX Wave Media was, like, a direction I was going. And actually I was taken to before I even remembered realizing it. But TX Wave Media and Data Foundry and Speedcast, what it is now, Speedcast, right on South Beltway 8 here, pretty close to Cullen, right next to the POD, like, container deal of, like, what normally shipments use as containers on, like, huge ships. It's called POD. It's almost like the iPod. And, like, Speedcast and some idea of, like, Sydney, Australia, representing some idea of all the values between, like, calculus and quantum, and the E and the EE that way. But anyway, yeah, it's already going on like an hour and 9 minutes and like 6 seconds. I'm going to take a break. For real. Yeah, so, like, there it is, okay?